It's a pleasure to be here and participate. And really, Orthoke is really my life story. I mean, many of the people we're talking about today I've met personally and known. So, and done quite a bit in the field. So it's a pleasure to be here with you to pass this tradition on to you, the good news that really is Orthoke. So Orthoke has really benefited from technology. I mean, if you look at this field in particular, and I'm sure you could go across the board and look at almost any medical field, but particularly the evolving of technology has really made a huge difference when you think about it to the contact lenses, the PMMA lenses of the past, to the modern materials, now with the high decay factors. On the equipment testing side, it's also been quite a revelation with the going from just the keratometer now to the Penacam and other methods of measuring corneal elevation, where you can measure 40, 50,000 points without a problem more with this new technology. So this has made a huge difference in how we evaluate Orthoke. And I always like to say Orthoke is really only limited by your imagination, what you want to do with it. Certainly you can take this any place. And I think Orthoke and the quest to control myopia are two things that have really walked hand in hand together over over these 60 years that Orthoke when it began. So there's been attempts throughout history. I saw it when I was in China. I saw tea bags. The Chinese put tea bags in the 1500s on patients' eyeballs, eyelids, when they slept to try to decrease myopia. And so nearsightedness, myopia is not a new thing. It's been around. But what is interesting about it is the fact that the degree of myopia today is unparalleled in history. The myopic epidemic, we call it. But the attempts to correct it, it's longstanding. It's this medical field we're in, and I often compare this, with RK and LASIK. We have similar methods that similar ways we look at those, trying to change the corneal shape. And though they use surgery, we do it with contact lenses and other means to change the shape of the eye. But it's a similar kind of a process to get the similar kind of results. And so we think alike. Really, we're kind of corneal engineers when you kind of think about it. We really want to redesign the cornea so it's better fitting for the types of problems and issues that our patients have to deal with. And this is like an anecdotal account of when they actually in the 1800s when they were attempting to flatten the keratoconic eye with a scleral lens, the glass scleral lens of all things. And the scleral, I'd love to come back and talk about sclerals at some point with Orthoke because that's another field that I've really developed. But this was in the 1800s. So, this goes way, way back. And this was glass. I mean, this is different. Think about wearing a glass lens today. It's a challenge, but they did it. I mean, the innovators came. And so Stuart Grant unfortunately passed away recently. I miss him greatly. He's been really Orthoke. He started with it in the 1960s. The story about Orthoke really begins with PMMA lenses, the polymethyl methacrylate. It's a polymer plastic. Was used in World War II for bomber pilots' windows and stuff like that. Well, they also found a use for this in contact lenses. And the interesting aspect about PMMA lenses were that this material, though it didn't breathe oxygen, can you imagine, wearing a lens that didn't breathe? They did our colleagues who practiced those in years did them. In fact, I actually fit some PMMA lenses before it was all said and done, but not very many. But mostly I saw patients with them. But this lens flattened on the eyeball as it was worn. So it had this unusual quality of flattening. And it didn't flatten just a little either. Sometimes a diopter or two diopters in a year. And this flattening process actually accidentally created an improvement in myopia, with patients. You didn't expect it. The interesting part about this was to do this as a clinician to try to refit these patients, because I got these patients back in the late 1970s. And they were then wearing these lenses which bear no resemblance to the lenses that were originally fit to them. So this flattening process of the eye caused Stu to look at the process of, well, okay, these eyes are improving. How can I do this on purpose? So it was really like a side effect of PMMA materials. And oftentimes, many of the things we use today are, we found that, in fact, this is a side effect. It has something to do with what we thought initially for the process that it was intended for, and it got that use was then took an indication eventually because it was such a beneficial side effect. So reverse geometry lenses. This is a quest. We're going to talk about this a lot. Today we design lenses with reverse geometry, and basically what that means is that the lens, most contact lenses before then were fit, so they flattened to the periphery. They started out with a base curve that fit parallel or somewhat similar to the base curve of the eye, and then they flattened to the periphery because the eye flattens to the periphery. It's the eccentricity of the eye, right? So a reverse geometry lens is different, and it's done because you're fitting a very flat center portion of the lens. You need to have this bridge between that and fitting the cornea again, and fitting the eccentricity property and taking care of that. So Jessen, back in the 1960s, part of Wesley actually concluded, because of the kind of work that we were starting to do on fitting these lenses, that you would need this reverse geometry design would work. So it's a theoretical model, and he was right on. As a matter of fact, he's really the father of all this as far as the reverse geometry designs. So he did that in 1962. Can you imagine? I mean, that was many, many years ago. So back in 72, Fontana was the first one to actually use this design to make a lens. And you can see here that he made it just flatter than K, the lens base curve, and then the lens periphery is fitted on K. So basically, the bridge to that lens wasn't very steep. It would be very good for myopia control today, but it was the first types of designs. And why do they do this? Well, why fit a reverse geometry lens? Well, the fact is that lenses up until that point were just fit flatter than K, and they just, you took half a diopter flatter than K, and a flat lens tends to fit superiorly. So you would be limited by how many degree of myopia you could too much. The lens would fit superiorly, it wouldn't center. So the point of doing a reverse geometry design is actually to get a lens to center to allow the centration of your base curve over the pupil. And so that steeper portion keeps it in place, and then the aligns with the alignment curve. So this is all something, that we discovered and was worked with, and Fontana was the first one to actually do something about that. So here you have some of the early studies that were done, and you'll see Grant's name mentioned a lot, and May and Grant were prominent at that time, and also in the National Eye Research Foundation. Roger Tabb at the bottom there, the Tabb design. I knew Roger, good man, and he actually was the first one to actually develop the hydraulic philosophy. Everybody's wondering, how does Ortho-K work? And Roger says it's all hydraulics, fluid pressure. And people doubted that, but he was right on. It's actually it's hydraulics, it's fluid pressure. That's why he needed a good seal off. So these were all early studies, linking Ortho-K and myopia. Berkeley is another one that's famous at the time. The reason why they did this was because Ortho-K has always walked this path with myopia. It's always been from the beginning. Orthokeratologists were myopia control specialists from the beginning, and so that really, we really understood myopia and what that meant, and correcting how important it was. And the rest of our profession has really gotten, slowly come around to that. It's taken many, many years to do that from the early days. And so, these designs, the PMA designs and these early designs, they were only effective for a diopter and a half of myopia, very small amounts. The reliability was not good. Patients would invariably have, when they took the lenses off, it would change. It wouldn't stay there. They'd have different kind of vision results as the day went on. It was difficult to drive later on. You see these in the anecdotal accounts of some of these studies that were done. And regression took weeks to months. So it was, if you had a patient that was coming out of these lenses, it would be a while before they would actually see properly again. So there's many limitations to these, early designs. So were they doing myopia control? Well, that, studies at the time some were positive on that, other ones were not. I think the general trend was to accept the fact that they were doing some myopia control, but how much and how reliable were they? So these were the early studies, and really this points out the fact that for the better part of that, the rest of that century, we in the orthoke industry were trying to get academia involved in doing something about this very actively. So I think the secret to all of our success here today and in the future is the fact that we were successful in getting FDA recognition. We'll talk about that, and academia to really take a look at this and do the studies that were necessary to, and we'll talk about some of the exciting results to make this field really what it is today. But that's what we suffered with early on. We didn't have the, orthokeratologists were considered mavericks, and that's a nice way, it's a nice term, because they weren't really in the main flow of things, and people looked at, why would you do this? Why would you mess up someone's vision like that? And so they didn't really understand that, basically this myopia thing was a big issue here, and that just restoring sight was nice for a myopic person, so giving them freedom during the day. So this was all like, again, a quest, surgically speaking, too. This is a similar time period. Our change came around in the late 70s and 90s. So we're looking at a very similar time, and I think, all of our colleagues in this refractive surgery and field we think very similarly when we look at myopia as far as treating it. The differences are that we do something that's really unique in the fact that we can control myopia in young people much more effectively with our procedures. So, whereas surgically you can't touch someone before you shouldn't do surgery before 18. So these kinds of things give us a benefit, that surgical solutions don't. So these again were someone looking for the quest for myopia control. Mixed results here. Some of them weren't good. Some of the results were negative, and this is something that we dealt with, because you could have one study that did really positive and have studies that did not so well. So looking on again, and these were again some of the controls where there were no controls on any of these, which you obviously can see that would be something lacking in this, and some of them were run for long periods of time, other ones weren't. And only few did axial length, which is actually pretty good that any of them really looked at axial length, which is kind of nice to have that data. So, this is we talked about earlier. This is an evolution from Stuart Grant to the modern topography-based systems. I've got thank yous to this presentation for Eddie Chow and Pat Caroline and Marino Formenti for their contributions here to this presentation. And that's Eddie down there with his six-curve design, and he has a practice in Toronto that Eddie Chow, Dr. Chow, and fits quite a few, as I do, Asian patients. So he did this study, and we developed this more effective myopia control model from that. Eddie had 2 years of research too. So, here we are with Stu, and it was a flatter than K lens that he was using. And for the most part, this was the lens design that really occupied most of us from doing this lens fit. To do this, you had to fit 3 or 4 different lenses before you got to even a 2-diopter myope would need 4 lens changes before they were done. You did a half a diopter at a time. It was very slow. And at the end of that time, then you did have some reasonable results. But again, we talked about the fact that, concentration, other kinds of issues, and flatter than base curve lenses would create that. So again, using aspheric designs, 3-zone philosophy, this is something we still do today. I still do aspheric design lenses. I'd be glad to talk to anyone about that. That's still a very effective design for myopia control, actually. So, a lot of the fundamental principles were good here, but they're lacking, we talked about really the development. And so that came with the reverse geometry lenses. And again, it was a godsend here because concentration. It helped with corneal, more effective corneal flattening, more consistent results all day. You can control them. We do today with our designs. We can make larger treatment zones, smaller treatment zones, depending on what you need. And so this was something that was controllable with an advantage with a reverse geometry lens. So this is a big deal. I remember my first personal experience. I've been doing the three. What do we call an OK3? We'll talk about that. And Tom Ream's design came out, the first 4-curve design. And, overnight you could correct 4 diopters of myopia, which was amazing. Remember, we're doing 1, 2 diopters at the time. And so I could do a 4-diopter myop overnight. It was like this is magic. We still look at Ortho K today as being magic. I mean, the patients look at it. I don't, here we are all technical, but I still ask you, how does this happen? I still say it's partly magic, isn't it? I mean, even to scale 5,000 patients personally, to be able to look at that, look at your first time Ortho K, whatever, take the lenses off, and how the heck, the parents have smiles on their face. The kids are just amazed at the vision that they can see again. Such a gift. And so, the rebirth of Ortho K was really this reverse geometry design. This really made it happen for all of us, and really made a lot of possibilities. That's the fact that at the same time, the lathing systems, the lathes could cut, down the accuracy, increased dramatically in the 90s, and this made us lenses with accuracy less than 10 microns of 10 microns or less of accuracy. Actually, look at your Ortho K lens; it was more accurate than almost any instrument but laser in your practice, when they could get this this fine tuning down with these amazing laser capabilities. So we talked about the OK3. This was a 3-curve design. This was in the middle. This was between flatter than K lenses, spherical flatter than K lenses, or aspheric designs, and the 4-curve. And this was in the late 80s. The context was really the innovators out here. Nick Stoyan. I don't have him in the presentation, but there's many people that deserve a mention here. He's one of them as being one of the real pioneers here in the field. And Nick developed this OK3 design. It's called OK3 because it had the reverse curve was 3 diopters steeper than the flat base curve. So it had the 3 diopters and OK4 4 diopters. And the design here was the 3 curves were the base curve, flat base curve, and you had a large intermediate reverse curve, basically. And then you had the peripheral curve. So you had no alignment curve. And so these lenses lacked, that again, you can guess, without an alignment curve, it's going to be a centration issue. But they were a step forward from the designs in the past. So when I first started working at the National Eye Research Foundation, we still had patients. That was in the 90s. We still had patients wearing OK3 lenses. They still worked, low myopia. And they also correct well with the roll astigmatism. They did really well with those designs because that large, broad reverse curve really helped control the dynamic of with the roll astigmatism. So this was a 4-curve design, and this really was a statement. This was developed by Sami Al-Haj and Tom Ream were the first ones to really come across with this, and so this made the difference. Like I said, overnight you could correct a lens, an eye with 4 diopters of myopia, which was like for us, going from 1 and 2 diopters of correction and still some stability issues. Being able to do that and give them vision was just amazing. And at the same time that this was happening in the U.S., this is many different places, including Asia. This was getting launched, and many different countries are starting to use the 4-curve as well as we were. So this is a very innovative thing, and made all the difference for us, and really set the stage for the development of our field. So along with that, can you imagine, this was in the early 1990s, Dr. Al-Haj came up with a computer-generated system where you took the computer topography and you actually designed lenses for that. So this was done in the 90s, and really way ahead of its time. It was a 4 or 5 curve design. And, kind of like set the table for everything else that came after it, because you think about it, I mean, this is the field today is, going this model, the computer-generated CAD systems have developed this. And so, this is a very, very neat way to design a lens. But this is the early 90s. This is Dr. Al-Haj developing this thing. So really good results. Again, the 4 curved lenses. This was a landmark, a watershed for everyone. The FDA, and you'll see similar things happening in the field. You have one aspect like this FDA approval, and you have legs happening. You have development topography systems. You have development of higher materials, testing abilities. Doctors getting better at design. software-generated systems. All this stuff is happening together. So it's not an isolated thing. When we talk about the CRT lens here and the FDA approval, this is something that happened along with all the rest of the development in the field at the same time. It's all like all the ships are rising here as the technology and the doctors getting training makes all the difference. With this FDA approval, it really brought the stage for the recognition of the field. It brought academia into it because now they were accepting of the fact that this was a field. Before this, we had our moments. We had times when there were characters in this field that were promising everything that they could deliver with Orthocat, and it was just false advertising. Unfortunately, we had to go through this. After the FDA approval and FTC getting down and saying, getting doctors, and these were not everybody. These are just people that just, it wasn't ethical. We had to get through that, and the FDA the approval of this lens kind of helped us bridge that gap. I know working at the National Eye Research Foundation, this is one of our goals to get the FDA approval. We all strove through the 90s. We had a meeting about that to get this done. We thought that was like the number one thing. We could see that our field wasn't going to grow until we got that acceptance. So this was an amazing event, and I know that many people were surprised by it. I was myself, but the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, has their own timetable of things that they do, and they do it in their own way. But they did approve this. They did not put a limit on age, which was huge for us because, like in China, they had a limit for quite a while of 8. You couldn't fit a patient under 18, which is you can't do a lot of myopia control. If you think about it, you can't fit you got to fit a patient when they're very young with this to have a benefit. So the FDA gave us that recognition. They gave us standing in the community. They set the table for academia. And the first lens, they can't say enough about Cary and CRT, that they did this work for us in the field, and they got this approval back in 2002. And again, at the same time, we're going to talk about the first global Orthokeratology symposium happened at that time too. All these things, it's generative energy that happens as we're talking today about all this, and carrying forward our these traditions that we have, and forward as we as colleagues move it up, raise the bar for everyone, and improve the results that are for our patients and humanity. So the lens had different kinds of to use that 6 millimeter optic zone, which you can again, that's the optic zone just in the beginning, in the 1960s. So here we go. And then the return zone depth, and then the landing zone, different names that we use for things, but it's the return zone depth we found out was the key thing here, that ring, the myopia control aspect of this lens. It's my favorite to work with as far as the reverse curve, we call them, also in design. So this was really a big deal. I worked with CRT before the approval. It's not about actual FDA investigation for them, but I worked with the lens before it got approval. So did some accumulation of data for them that they needed. So again, it allowed us to correct myopia up to 6 diopters now. Remember, the 4 curve was 4 diopters, and it corrected astigmatism of 175. So very good results here. A lot of patients with this, a lot of patients we were seeing could be handled with this within FDA approval. So that was really, you can imagine with this field, these lenses were available. You could have it to fit them by trial set, and then when they were standard, they had standard values for the base curve and the zone depth and the alignment zone, also the landing zone. And so again, easier to fit, took some of the mysticism out of the field. Before everyone had his own design or her own design, and this kind of helped with that because it was a practitioner could step in and start fitting them and learning how to do this without having to wonder what was in the black box. We said Eddie and I Dr. Chow and I used to sit down and wonder, what are these designs like? How they design this lens? Because you didn't know they had proprietary. What the curves were, and we wondered, well, how can I be how can I treat a patient if I don't know what I'm doing with the curves of this lens? And Paragon, actually, you were aware of all the curves here and how this lens, functioned and worked. And we got many people through this the approval. Many different designs, many more since this point. And then you had in 2004, you had the VST design. Now, I was involved in this one. I did the early work with Euclid. It actually was part of the FDA investigation. They got the initial approval on, and this became, Bausch & Lomb actually acquired that. So I did the FDA, I was one of the FDA investigators for Euclid in the late 90s. So this design was actually picked up by Bausch & Lomb eventually and approved. And it was another different material. Paragon uses HDS 100 and the Bausch & Lomb equal lens too. And so used a different lens material, a little bit different design of the lenses as far as different terminology to it. But basically still, the reverse geometry lens that could correct higher amounts of myopia if you needed it. So the VST designs, all of these here were again, this was many different designs that some of them were we knew what the designs were, some of them we didn't, and this created issues. Because obviously, I think doctors need to understand how a lens works. It's always the goal with our organization, with our group, that you understand as a colleague, even if you choose to order a design, that you should know why that design is working, and particularly you should be able to troubleshoot it if it's not working. And so I think this is a fundamentally important thing to understand. So again, a lot of different choices here, and you can imagine this goes across the gamut as far as what you can do with the lens and how they go from empirical fitting here to trial fitting to topography-based fitting. All of these different aspects, different ways they do this. So again, it makes a big deal with I think we feel it makes a huge difference for you to be able to be able to understand why this lens is working or not working. Particularly, I mean, it's great when everything works out, but then if your lens is decentering, if you're not getting full correction, you should know how to fix that yourself without having to talk to anyone to do that. So the good news is a lot of different choices here, challenging in a way to get through this and figure out what you want to use. But again, good news that they work really well for the most part. When we did the study, one of the studies I did, one of the FDA studies that I did with I won't name the group, but we found out that 80 to 85% of the lenses worked first time. So that's pretty good, when you get 80% effectiveness. But we as doctors, we need to fit everybody. So you do with the other 20. So it's important to be able to make that happen for them, and we feel like the doctors make such a central point in that fitting process that they should understand that. So VST, a little bit less myopia correction than the CRT, -5 was the limit, and 1.5 diopters of astigmatism. So again, just if you think about it, if you look at it closely, you'll understand. I'm sure you're all dealing with patients who are high myopes already. It's nice to be able to correct someone like a 5 diopter myope, but what do you do with a patient that has 6, 7 diopters of myopia already? How do you handle that? And we'll talk a little bit about that going forward. Some of the studies actually have given us some indication of what the best ways are to handle patients like that. But again, this doesn't fit everybody. Obviously there are patients that are going to need different kinds of treatment. We talked at the equal lens DK was 85. Today we're using materials that are a lot higher than that. But this, again, one of the problems with equal lens 2 is that it's not as stable as like EXO and other materials are. So a little bit of the issue with that, but again, we look today for, we're fitting lenses. We look for high DK, so very healthy to have, get that oxygen to the eye, particularly with a closed eyeball, at night. And again, extended wear with Ortho-K, so that's a big deal. And we use the button colors were just the way to count, basically to count an Ortho-K lens. And so I always felt like the numbers that you're looking at were always understated, when they talked about how many lenses were fit in Europe or Asia or whatever it was, because they were trying to do that with the color. And I know many of my colleagues that don't pay attention that they fit different, colors. They wouldn't be an Ortho-K design, but they'd be the red-yellow color, so, or the blue-green of the HDS. So again, it's popular to fit yellow with available with the HDS material. You got a certificate when you finish this. This is something that the doctors could then hang in their wall, and it was an online certification, so it was just the beginning. It wasn't the end game here. You could answer some basic questions and understanding of the Ortho-K principles, and then you got that. You took an online exam, and then got your certification. Same thing for Paragon; they had their own certification. So, and this goes today too. The different designs that you're fitting, you do get those certifications. You have to pass a little bit of a test. But this is again only the beginning. This is just the beginning of the process, not the end. All right. So again, we discussed the fact that all this stuff is going on at the same time. I could be talking about one topic, but you have to realize that this is a field. I mean, it's going on everywhere. It's going on in material development. It's going on in software development. It's going on in lathing. It's going on in your heads and your training and everything else that's happening. And your equipment, the advancements, the technology. The good news is that in topographies and in other systems, the prices have gone down. I mean, some of the early topographers were. I had an ISIS, which was back in the 80s, and this was expensive, very expensive. It was U.S. about $60,000. Well, now topographers about one-sixth of that. They're much less, and they're much more capable of doing so much more. Right? We know our computers, the same story. But you have to have topographers to do Ortho-K. This is a central theme. It's a standard of care that to do Ortho-K, you must have topography based. To look at the pre-fitting map, and then to look at your fittings, because it's very difficult to follow patients. And yet you can still, in this field, you can do diagnostic fitting, and you can fit empirically even, and with pretty good accuracy. So I always enjoy personally the aspect of being able to really go through this thing and to enjoy the fact that I could do so many different things with it. I never really stuck with one principle or fitting concept, and I do my own design as well. So I fit about everything that you saw. I mean, I just purposely did it. And sometimes I would even fit patients with different lens designs on different eyes, sometimes high myopes, just to see what would happen, as far as if I could correct all the myopia or not. And the good news is this is a very safe procedure. I mean, we're going to talk about the studies here in a little while. And it's a very safe procedure to do, so you could actually do things like that. I mean, the limitation, again, is only you. The technologies are out there. I mean, goodness, it's an investment in you to invest in the best technologies they have available with you. And it's certain. All right, so, use your capability here. It's amazing. We're talking about, this is so timely because look at that. There we are, right? Haven't you found that sometimes some of these fits don't look optimally so good, right? I mean, Eddie's taught me this, Eddie Chow, but it works beautifully. I mean, I look at the fit and it doesn't look like it would have a good treatment zone or anything, and yet when the patient wears that lens overnight, the topography is excellent. So I always tell the doc, don't judge that thing just because the fit doesn't look quite what you think optimally. Let the patient wear the lens to see what the topography tells you. Because a lot of times that lens initially, or at least when he's wearing it, doesn't look that good. I mean, you know, it can't happen overnight, even if it isn't an ideal. It works.
Mm-hmm.
So you just have to, you need to really allow that to happen. And I think the worst thing that can be done is to judge it too quickly, any kind of ortho-K fit. So yes, the goal that can be described as what is that most ideal myopia control pattern? We change our mind. You know, we don't do the same thing. I don't do the same thing I did back in the early 2000s. You know, fitting style entirely changed also to allow that. The evolution. So here we have them. Remember we talked about all, you know, which among these would be an ideal, you know, fit for your patient? Well, it may, depending on people, maybe something, these choices here, but what is the ideal myopic control design? And, you know, through the work with Eddie and a number of others, Pat Caroline and a number of others, we found that, you know, we want that smaller treatment zone, you know, and we want a very steep reverse curve, and we want that all within the pupil. So, you know, your patient, I often talk about the fact that you need to know and understand a lot more about that patient than you think. You need to know even the vitreal depth. You need to know the retina itself. You're doing your axial length measurements. It's all going to impact on that pupil size and how much myopia you're going to be able to correct, and then also how much control you're going to be able to do for the cornea. And so invariably, it's more involved. You know, that's why you need to understand all this stuff, because it's, you know, if you got a patient with a small pupil size, you know, let's say it's a 5 millimeter pupil size, you're not going to want to fit them with a 6 millimeter optic zone. It's not going to work so good. Almost that optic zone, the treatment that controls the myopia is going to be outside the pupil. It won't be on the retina. Always, when you look at your patients, you know, you're going to evaluate that. I think that's one of the first things I look at is pupil size. You know, you want to know dim and bright illumination both ways, and then you're going to go from there. But you have to look at the pupil. Other things, get topographies and other things, but that's a fundamental thing. You know, if you're going to talk about myopia control. So here we are, the international organization, and we're here and talking to you. And this is, you know, something for me that's very special, because we didn't always have this group. I mean, most of this period of time we're talking about, didn't exist. And the path to this is kind of interesting, because nobody should take this for granted that we actually have this organization. It's all, you know, as you're looking at this today, and the organizers of this webinar that we're doing, and across the world, you know, all the things that are happening with the organization, with the myopia control and myopia management, you know, testimony to what this group means. And that's really when we set this up, it really was very important. So there's no way that this isn't related to the development of myopia. You know, obviously this is a big push that occurred. Started out in Asia, spread to the rest of the world, basically, as far as being aware of the myopia incidents. And so we have literally been everywhere, you know, with this organization. And you know, this is our ancestry, this is our history. So we want to talk a little bit about it, because you have to know where you came from, right? Where you're at, you know, your great traditions came from. This is the National Eye Research Foundation. And this was founded in 1955 by Newton Wesley. And it was the education arm of Wesley Jessen. Wesley Jessen was the manufacturer of rigid PLA lenses, and they were the Wesley and Jessen of this. We're talking about founders, right? Newton Wesley, George Jessen, and Newton actually. We're going to talk about him. Is one of the great pioneers in you know, one of the great doctors of our time, because of what he did for contact lenses, and talk about that. But he was the founded this thing. He was the chairman of the board of the National Eye Research Foundation, and they ran this group. They had their first symposium in Chicago. Over 1,000 doctors came, and now remember, this is a time when contact lenses were not popular. We're going from the early 50s people wore glasses. They didn't wear contact lenses. Before that, they only had glass scleral lenses to wear. Newton actually, Tui was actually the one who got the first patent to make corneal lenses. And this was really the first contact lenses. And if you think about it, this is pretty remarkable because he barnstormed around the country to make this happen, to sell the idea of wearing contact lenses. People that don't be safe. You know, we talk about Orthoke, but this is just contact lens wear. You know, we have to get here before we can get to Orthoke. So this is our tradition. This is one of our founders of this group. And they had the IOS, the International Orthokeratology section, which is the first international group that was a fellow. I was a fellow of the IOS. It was where doctors went and demonstrated their ability for fellowship. What they, in their cases, they submitted cases, went through oral examination, and got their FIAOS. And this was the first international entity. Really, like a modern, fellowship here. This is the process that really set the stage for all of that. And we talk about standards. Obviously, the Europe has been amazing in this. We'll talk a little bit about Marino and your group, Olga, and the rest of the doctors who put the work in to make great going there, and everyone else that has made this happen. But they've been one of the leaders here in setting the protocols, for Orthoke and myopia control that we've adopted internationally. And can you imagine, we go to a place like Asia, and they don't have any idea what, they sometimes they don't even have the proper solutions for Orthoke, to take care of the lenses. So they don't have a clue about protocols, and to develop these protocols was really necessary, but they weren't even there, so we've really kind of stepped in as an organization. So this was our predecessor, the National Eye Research, and they created, like we're creating the environment. That's what I think I'm going to say here is the environment. We're trying to create that for you all, and take over this field and grow it, and see it and go to it its ultimate where it really belongs. And so the modern market of orthokeratology was set with this, and I happened to be very involved with this organization, which was set the stage for actually what all came afterwards. So there's Newton. He had both an MD and an OD degree. His MD was in research. He acquired it in Japan. Newton was an amazing individual. Knew him, he's a mentor of mine. Knew him personally. He was he suffered from the intern camps in the U.S. back in the Second World War, and we did an awful thing back then and put our Japanese Americans in intern camps that because we were afraid. And he was one of those, and they wouldn't allow Newton to practice on night, so he had to move to Chicago. He wouldn't let him stand the coast. He's also an amazing individual because he owned an entire optometry school, Pacific. Newton owned this. Imagine this. He owned the school. So, many different things here. And he also had keratoconus. That's the reason why he got into the contact lenses, because of keratoconus. For that, he really got that interest in the contact lenses. And so it set his whole development up as far as how this proceeded. And it was my pleasure to actually fit his cones, during the time that I knew him and ran the group. But his cones were pristine, and he did it on himself. He would often joke about trial and error if he tried to fit his own eyes, with lenses. Can you imagine this? This is what we had to do back then because there wasn't the technology, there wasn't the know-how. So he truly was a Renaissance man. He knew a lot about a lot of things. He was a great humanitarian, despite the fact that he went into a Second World War. They were permitted to leave, but only out of the West Coast area. And despite that, he was truly, a man for all seasons, a man that really, remarkable to know him. These people, it changes your lives, and he did that for, I have the pleasure of my mentors and one of the people that made a big difference in my life. So there was an amazing guy. And like we talked about, he had the first World Congress. Over 1,000 doctors showed up in 1950 on the lakefront in Chicago on the North Shore. And this was a field that it didn't exist. 8 years before that, didn't exist. Over 1,000 doctors came worldwide to this first contact lens congress. this was the National Eye Research Foundation. We held an international meeting in Hawaii, which was really nice. But we had people. It was remarkable because it's really the first international event that we actually held because we had doctors from Australia and Europe and and Asia come to this meeting. We got to meet a lot of interesting people. About. This was the first time I met Pat Caroline. Actually, was at this meeting because Pat was really an unusual guy there. He's really something else. So I met Pat at this meeting, and that's there's John Reinhardt in that picture, a number of others, Roger, and a number of the others that were big in this field at the time. But NERF was really the organization that really brought this together. Before there was GOS, and I had the pleasure, near the end of this organization, of actually being president for a while. So that was something that really helped in my further evolution in this field and development in leadership. So it couldn't have done that without this being Newton naming me president. That was really a special thing for me and a responsibility. I really, appreciate the fact that he put that responsibility on my shoulders. So we all have memories of this. This is like, I think you talk to people about when these things happen in your lifetime. You have special events that happen that you remember. Like with Kennedy was shot, is something I remember exactly where I was at. These kinds of things. But on the more positive side, GOS was something special for all of us because the Global Orthokeratology Symposium, and it was the first time we were really together. It was this kind of attendance, much less. So this was 2002 in Toronto, and it was filled with excitement. This was celebrating the coming of the CRT lens, the FDA approval, and you could just feel it in the air. 25 different countries here. So the key thing I think that we remember from this point, though, is the fact that at the end of this first GOS, we organized, a bunch of us organized, and we met before we went home. And different country organizations came about after this. We had the Orthokeratology Academy of America started here in 2002. I was given the trust of the attendees to actually put this organization together, and a number of other groups were also put together too, around the world. And we also had this, thing, the organization beginning. And there was at that time to develop the idea to develop an international group. And we'll talk about this again. This was supposed to be an international group that was supposed to be all this country groups. So this is a big deal, and this is actually when the modern FIAOMC, really actually began, because this is the organization that came out of this actually became the FIAOMC. And there's Marino. It's really a lot of fun. They had a big shindig about this. Bosch and Lomb spent a lot of money. They had this the CN Tower in Toronto. They had a whole part. Thought that the world was our oyster now. Everything was going to happen and everything was going to flow. And they promised a lot of things to deliver, which never happened. But we had our moment anyway. I got come back from that. It was an amazing. So again, this went on a few years younger back then. This went on for a number of years till 2005, and we missed one because of SARS. 2003 meeting was canceled in Toronto because of SARS. But other than that, it went well. We had these big events, and a lot of academic papers were presented. Again, at the same time, to get the idea of what was going on. You had the CRT approval. You had the lathing improvements. You had the Academia now doing the studies, which we'll talk about in just a few minutes. The technologies were taking off. The companies were getting organized, to sell you the equipment that you needed for your practice to do this kind of thing. And they kept pushing everybody's bar, we kept raising everybody's level. Do it better, do it more, do something that you can improve. And so this is what these meetings really meant, was that, we wanted to get better at doing this. A lot of great things went on at the same time here. So we talk about now the new era begins. This is who we are around the world. So again, a collective effort of all of us to make this happen. There's no question that this is an organization of people, of colleagues, of great people that have put the time in to make this possible, and we really appreciate all that. We're growing. So here we were. The GOS stopped after 2005. Pat Caroline, Craig Norman also came to me, and particularly Craig, and asked me to carry on for them because the GOS was it wasn't financially viable for them to continue. So they asked us to carry this thing on. So the Orthokeratology Academy of America at that point. And so we did just that. We had our first meeting. One of the best things that ever happened to us was a grant we got from Bosch and Lohm. It was a $10,000 grant back in 2004 that they gave us to start having an educational meeting, which we had in Houston, Texas. Our first meeting. So I constantly remind to this day that's probably the best money you've ever invested. Can you imagine? $10,000 to get this whole organization, around the world. I mean, what's that? How much is that worth, right? So it wasn't just that. I mean, I can reflect on that. I'm sure there were many other parts of this story that we all can relate to, how people have helped us out, and organizations and industries helped us. So here we were. OA was good at that time. We actually there was an Italian section that came up that others were involved in that, and they actually grew from the OA. They actually were members of the OA first, and then they branched out and became their own Italian organization, AOC. And so they were going at the same time. And then you had, in the Far East, you had SkyOptix was busy in Singapore area, and there were, Australia had their organization, which they were actually had developed in 1985, the oldest ortho-K organization. So they were going on through all of this as well. So what do you do after this? Who fills the vacuum? No GOS, right? So you have this big gap. So you started to think about what would be, what would happen after this. And not only that, but a lot of the member countries that had been created in 2002 disappeared. I know personally in our group, we found it more advantageous to combine with Canada and Mexico to create the OA being a North American organization. And so that became an evolution, so to speak. So this was going on around the world, but there were a number of organizations that just didn't make it. So again, we talked about this international entity. It wasn't happening. We had a bunch of people that couldn't make a decision, couldn't get together. It was just, it wasn't something anybody got to the point where they did something about it. So we just sat there. And so there's a big gap in here and lack of leadership from on top. That brought on the actual, when we really got going with this, and the first efforts at this were back at OA held a meeting, and we had one in Reshaping the World in San Diego in 2008. And Marino came down to that one. He couldn't stay for the international effort that we had after that. It was a picture of that meeting that actually failed to organize an international entity. But he was interested, very interested. He couldn't stay for the whole thing. He had to leave early, but his interest was expressed, and it was his drive and my desire to see us grow as a U.S. group and to grow as an international group, because I could see early on that we needed to grow this thing, because it wasn't, if it stayed in just in the U.S., it was going to be a shame, because we had all this ability that we wanted to help grow around the world. And Marino saw that as well, and offered the fact that we could work with them and develop more of an international entity. But, we eventually talked about getting together and forming a group. And you can't, this is again, we failed at this before growing this international thing, so you can imagine. But, you have to have the right kind of people involved in here. And Marino and myself and Professor Shea at that point were the pillars of this. She with the Chinese group and that they formed. And it became a fact. It became an organization that actually, we put this together despite objections from everywhere you can imagine. Even for our own boards had problems with it. We made this happen because we could see that overriding this was more important than one country. It was more important to be unified around the world. We needed to do this. Everybody was going to have to take a step back as far as nationalism and country and look at the international scene and say, this is better for humanity. This is better for everybody else. So we, let's do this thing. So let's do this. Let's step beyond this and do the right things. And so this happened, and I'll never forget our meeting first meeting in China, where they told us that you can't. They told us we wouldn't succeed in China because we had a member group that was like less than 500 members in China. It's got 1.4 billion people. A lot of those people are nearsighted. So they told us that you're not going to succeed in China. Some very astute people told me that to my face, and I said, well, don't judge us ahead of time because we've succeeded everywhere else. We've put this group together. We'll work in China. And of course, only one doctor in China, I said, if that was the case, even that which isn't true, it would be the best doctor, because this Professor Cary, who was is famous in China. Everyone knew her, and she was like the amazing person. Every clinic we went to with Professor Shea, we traveled around China. She got hugs from the doctors, her colleagues. The ophthalmologists would all hug her because she was just that kind of a person. She was that made a difference in people's lives. She was amazing leadership. So, needless to say, despite the fact that we were told it wasn't going to happen, it happened, and it happened very well. And they were waiting for us. Actually, they wanted this international organization for years. They were just waiting for us to come, and we did. So it worked out beautifully. So the American Academy, the AAOMC, which was the OAA, is part of one of the three pillars that founded the group. And we've done, this organization in the U.S. has done a lot as far as the fellowship process. It began with our group, and we expanded into the national fellowship, which is, we've got fellows from around the world now. So we're very proud of that. 500 members, so it's done well. We have our Latin American group, ALOCM, which is South America. We decided to permit Central America to become part of this group because they're Spanish speaking. So it's easier for them because other than Brazil, every country down there speaks Spanish. So we had we had a meeting in Iguazu just this last year or so, and it was beautiful down there with their first really Congress that they had, and they had 140 plus doctors that showed up for that, which was really good, a good first meeting. Coming up is we'll see what happens with the situation internationally with the current situation we're in, but we have a meeting in Mexico City. It's an international meeting in October that we'd like to see people attend as far as around the world, but again, we'll have to see. This is a big question mark, but they're hosting it this year, if that happens. So it's looking forward to that if it occurs. So then, this is our newest group, the 7th section. They've already had several meetings in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. This is the AOC is the Asian Optometric Congress, and the AOMC is a division of the Academy of Orthokeratology and Myopic Control. And they've had meetings where they've had over 250 people attend in Kuala Lumpur. It's hard to, you realize that the situation with myopia in Russia is significant, but in Asia it's even more. So you have like 70-80% incidence. And so they want to learn, how to do this. And this is very important for them to get this. And so this Congress really does a lot of the teaching tools around the Southeast Asia. So it's a very important for us and their development. And our section is in charge of the myopia control part of myopia management. So they're going to teach that. So that's a really huge thing, a big responsibility. So we're kind of thrilled about the fact that we have that kind of influence. We'll have that through that section. And of course, Europe, one of the original group, and to developing this, the protocols was huge on this thing, and developed the Orthokeratology protocols, which were very necessary, and now the myopia management protocols, which we've adopted internationally. So it's made a huge difference. And you've had your meetings, which have been really great. Europe has its challenges, different languages, but if this, I often joke that this is like a UN here. This is like our whole running the entire organization worldwide. It's like Marino's job within Europe to help this because of so many different languages. So it's a similar challenge because although mini world sitting right here with all the different things you had to deal with, but it works, and it's growing in Europe, and now we see these kinds of developments, and we can have feel good about all the different places that we've been able to influence and develop Orthokeratology. So the BIPOC is the India group with they're in India and Southeast Asia as well. And Tesh Bharat is, used to be involved with Europe, is now the president of that organization. They've held we had our international meeting there last year with about 250 people attended that thing in Mumbai in September. And they continue growing growing meetings throughout India and the region, again, developing Orthokeratology. So it's our representative down there as well. And of course, IAOA, President Lou Fan now taking over from Professor Shea, and we talked about the fact that they have 7,000 plus members, and they have a lot of fellows in developing fellowship down there in the training. They have a special category that they do with their group. That they have a special certification for the senior. They call it a senior level certification, which basically means that they, even being members of that, they can't actually go for the fellowship until they get extra training in this field. So we kind of make sure that they're really well qualified for fellowship. So they have people going for what they call senior level all the time. So it's an extra level they put in within the fellowship program. And again, we talked about the fact that I have to change that. There's more than that. There's more than 2.5 million lenses fit in China now. We're talking about close to 4 million. So they're fitting over 1 million lenses a year. At least it was before the COVID thing hit. So again, it's a lot of things happening with this, and a lot of lenses fit. The great news is it's being done successfully. It's not to say that you don't see problems. You do. I mean, there's always issues with water. Acanthamoeba is a huge issue. You got to stay away from tap water. But seriously, other than the things that you can prevent, by your better care of the patients, it's really a safe procedure. You got to just monitor all the time. I know we do in our practice to make sure, especially in situations, we always worried about going into China because of the hygiene issues and other things that there were, but now China's like our jewel in this whole thing. They've really the doctors have done such a great job. So another interesting facet of China is the section that they've now developed the private sector, which is interesting. Air hospitals and other groups have developed. This is the OSO group, and again, the oldest Orthokeratology organization. There's a picture of Amanda there that, unfortunately, Amanda left us. She's passed away. Really great person. I used to look forward to seeing her all the time. These are a great group of colleagues that do a great job with OSO. And again, this is some of our traditions. These people have been doing it longer than anybody. And of course, we always look towards Australia for innovation and Orthokeratology designs. And so Gavin Bonham is the leadership there. Done that for many, many years. So here we are as the international group. And a lot of things have gone on, with with us and what we've done, and great things around the world. I'm very proud of this organization, and we're looking forward to do much more, right? In the future as allowed as we can, and growing a great fellowship process too. So, and then the community, again, this is just going over some of the things that we've done. A lot of them done in Europe here first. So, myopia prevention, we adopted we're the first adopters of myopia. We're the oldest myopia organization in the world, as far as the colleagues. We put together the myopia back in the early 2000s. We were focusing on myopia. Our programs had myopia in them. In the 2007, 2008, we actually had courses on myopia control. So, this is tradition. We are, we as a traditional parent organization, we need to really, through our colleagues, need to step out and make people aware of the fact that this, here we were the providers of this, initially when no one else was doing this. So the studies, again, this is something that, it's come about over time. This is kind of just going over a little bit of the U.S. studies. We'll cover a few of them specifically. But it's something that at the same point, the development, the academia came in where we talked about we needed academic part of it, and they were doing the studies. It's coming along again with everything else, the development of the field, our development, the lathing development, the instruments development, all the innovations that came about that allowed us to make a better lens, more accurate lens. So I put the Orinda study in here because it was a study of myopia, and you can't really separate this. You can't really talk about myopia. Orthokeratology and myopia go hand in hand, and have since 1960. And so the Orinda study really basically was a broad-based study that longitudinal that really determined that that you really need to look at the hyperopia before the child becomes myopic. For instance, if you have a 6-year-old that is only like plus 75, then they're getting axial elongation because they should be like plus 1.25. So this is really underutilized in optometry, in ophthalmology. But we really need to look at the patients early on, the hyperopes, before they even get nearsighted. I know Dr. Tan from Singapore, the low-dose atropine guy, he's very much into this now, is treating patients before they get myopic. So this is part of our, this is what we're doing. If we even, we'll do things, may do Ortho-K want them, may do multifocal soft contact lenses, may do behavioral things, maybe do atropine. But all these things are our tools, and we need to look at hyperopia here as, not wait for the patient to become nearsighted, because that's going to be already, you've already allowed their axial elongation. And that's one thing that I've really focused on in my work, is how much different taking axial lengths now. For me, it's I've changed the way I practice now because I take axial length. It's so much more information that I need to take care of my patients rather than just looking at other data. That specifically is, I think, truly very, very important. The other study that came along with this is called the CLEAR study. I didn't put it in here just time-wise, but the CLEAR study was also developing myopia, what predictors for myopia. Not only do you have the low hyperopia, but you have also the CLEAR study set the stage with the predictor about parents. Basically, if one parent is nearsighted, there's a better 50% chance a child will be. Two parents, like it's over 75%. Numbers for Asians are even higher than that. I don't know specifically for that one. But I think the important thing about the CLEAR study is that it had all this groundwork, and ethnically speaking, they had different patients with different ethnic backgrounds that they did axial length measurements and other things. And the CLEAR study has been the foundation where every other study is dependent on that data. So I know a lot of studies that came after that, when they used the data from the CLEAR study as a foundation for their own studies. So it's really very, very important. So, you have to fit Ortho-K, you have to be careful that especially with kids, right? You have to be very safe about it, because you don't want to hurt a child. That goes without saying. We're dealing with in pediatric practice here. We go beyond ourselves to take care of those kids. They're our own kids, basically. So Jeff Walleen, who's another pillar here in the field, Jeff and Pauline Cho, did this study where they looked at the safety of it and found out that it's safe to do a study. So this was the look study. And then I want you to come away with this, the idea there's tons of information here for you that that you have at your resources, and this information is confirmation on how safe this procedure is and how effective it is. You mentioned Tom Ream before. This was a retrospective study he did in his clinic. It showed that there is myopia, it slows myopia progression, even a retrospective study. There wasn't anything done with axial length measurements on this one. You know, it was important because someone did some data, collected data from their clinic. That was 2003. And then you had the CRT lens with the children's overnight investigation, and found it safe to wear the lenses. And remember, the look study said, is it safe to even do this? And this found that the overnight lenses were safe, and it was good efficacy. It was Jeff again. And then Pauline Lark was one of the landmark things, and Pauline's a good friend, and she's done amazing things in this field, and there's many studies she's done and continues at Hong Kong Polytechnic. And this is the beginning of it all for us, because it really tied in, around a 50% control of myopia with patients that did Ortho-K versus other modalities. And so, this needed to be confirmed. Crayon was Jeff Walling's version of that, confirming similar. You see the differences in they used the spectacle versus the Ortho-K group, and they 50%, and they did this with the soft lenses at that point. And this is going to, axial length measurements confirming that. And these lined up beautifully with Pauline work. So, and a 50% efficacy with Ortho-K, our FDA would accept 30% as being effective, because what they're looking at is the elimination of high myopia. And if you start with a patient when they're young enough, you can't eliminate most high myopia, and high myopia is where we get most of the damage, axial length elongation over 26 millimeters. So these studies confirm that 50%, and with 50%, you could really put a dent into high myopia if you started early enough with each patient. So this is plenty of control, and it's at your fingertips. The SMART study was something I threw in here. I was participating in this, another study, FDA study that I participated in. We had incredible results with this thing, and with the control group, and wearing pure vision lenses, and the Euclid lens we used. But we couldn't use the data effectively because we couldn't get axial length measurements because the instruments we were using were defective. It was a palm scan unit, and at the time it wasn't good enough, and so we got all kinds of strange axial length measurements. It was too bad because we had over an 80% control of myopia compared to the control group. So it's just remarkable and very successful. Again, we did this on all these test subjects. I did a lot of the Ortho-K part of the study because I had a lot of Asian patients who wanted to participate. Some of the other sites didn't do as many, but again, very safe. Another statement is safety and efficacy. So I kind of included it here because we went through this thing. And again, this was a study that confirmed that 85% of first-time fits were effective. You didn't have to change a lens. So this is MCOS. This is Jack San Domingo's study. Nice job with this. They got a 30% reduction in myopia. This is done in Spain. And the question is, why do these things vary? And we think some of the answers to that, the age group of the patients, the low myopia of the patients, things like that, and the ethnicity of the patient. So you'd have to kind of look at all those factors. There's more than meets the eye here. So this got a bit lower, but remember, still at 30% control, our FDA feels that that's very meaningful, and that's going to put a huge dent into high myopia. Again, Pauline with Romeo, and taking home, there's a lot of studies, and very successful. Again, around 43% reduction in the Romeo study. March on, and then here's another familiar face. The toric, good 52% reduction with toric designed lenses. You had the idea here that a lot of studies have been done. You're right. It's GoPro. Guess what? Pauline again. This is a high myopia partial reduction study. Interesting here is patients over the FDA limit, over their limits, and partially corrected them with Ortho-K, and then used glasses for the remainder. And she got out of that. So Helen did a nice study, Helen Swarberg. She's retired, but again, a good friend, and she's one of the years in the field. Can't say enough. And with her rock group, which is the research in Orthokeratology down there, they did a lot of work with Ortho-K, a lot of meaningful studies have been done through that group. This was an interesting study because she did one eye, she fit with Ortho-K lenses, the other one she fit with a GP lens. And she measured the axial change after she did that. And then the other eye, switched them. And in each case, 50% myopia, again, demonstrated that on the other eye, changing over. So, interesting study you could do that demonstrate the fact that this is so efficacious that you can count on that. And then, this is one that was done in fact of, again, a confirmation, a 2-year study. We're going to be talking about some longer term studies too, which is kind of cool. So again, this was a 36% reduction. This is Japan. So they did this study. Again, lower reduction, but still very meaningful. Again, this is really international. And so this is one of my favorites. I participated in this one, the highest retrospective study. Mark Bullimore, another great individual in the field that's done a lot of work and still does it to this day. And, we accumulated data. This was a retrospective study that we accumulated data from CRT and BSD. My clinic was participating in this. We did a lot of patients, so we had plentiful to look at. And so this study actually confirmed, that how the safety of Ortho-K, looking back at this data, and basically stated that this is safer than overnight extended wear soft lenses, somewhere in between daily wear soft and extended wear. Definitely something that you need to talk about with your patients, as far as risk factors, because there's a risk to wearing a contact lens, but there isn't anything unusual here. The study confirmed that. The FDA wanted us to do this. We did this for this purpose, and again confirmed the case that it's not that it can't happen, but the fact is that it's a rare event, fortunately. Informed consent is necessary, but it's safe. So, safe as any. So, again, this is another study that we did. This is a 2-year study on Chinese patients specifically, and got a nice control effect of Ortho-K and axial length. Again, over 50%. And again, the short-term effects of Ortho-K. This eye was interesting. I picked it out because these studies were done in 2018, 2019, because it tested these patients to see if there were any abnormalities that caused from Ortho-K. And yes, it's a short-term study, but they found no adverse effects. They initially saw a change in corneal sensitivity, but after 3 months, it returned to normal. So really, again, emphasizing the fact that Ortho-K is very safe and efficacious. This was a Chinese study. And, here's my buddy Hiroka, Dr. Hiroka out of Japan, done a lot of stuff. And this is a 10-year study, people. Japan is extremely conservative in how they do things. And it took them a long time to study Ortho-K, and they did this over 10 years. 10 years. I got asked the question of 20 years. That's true. I've done patients over 20, but here they did a study on it. It supports safety and efficacy of our procedure here. So I can't end this talk on any more positive note than this, that you have here a 10-year study that supports this, that these patients wore these lenses without a problem. So again, we're dealing with a very safe, very safe specialty. So this has been indeed a pleasure. I hope I slowed down a little bit. I hope it was, I hope it was a little bit better in the second half. I couldn't get too ahead of myself with that. But I enjoyed this tremendously. This was a lot of fun to do this.